Is it offensive? Does this cartoon by Canadian political editorial cartoonist Michael D. Adder further perpetuate the stigma of mental health? Is Ontario Conservative MPP Lisa MacLeod, the woman depicted in this cartoon, playing the mental health card in an effort to get people to sympathize with her and forget her transgressions? Are those crying offense actually being hypocritical? Stick around, boys and girls, as we try to answer these questions and more. Hey kids, Straight Talking Georgia coming at you this fine Saturday evening. If you're new here, welcome to the channel and thanks for stopping by. Here we talk about social issues of the day with more of a bent on mental health, but not exclusively. Also, we do some storytime vlogs around here as well. If you're into this kind of thing, please consider subscribing and hit that little ringy dingy icon below so you can be notified every time I upload. Before we get into it, those of you who have followed me for some time here know that I used to be a political blogger, and I'm still pretty much a political junkie, especially those who follow me at the Sister Sage account on Twitter. Myself, I used to do some image montages of politicians and journalists to accompany my blog posts. So I know that basically this type of creation is to elicit a response, but also to entertain or to educate. It has many purposes. And Michael D. Adder's cartoon that I showed at the top of this video is no exception. While this channel is supposed to be more or less a political free zone, sometimes there is no getting away from it, and that includes discussing mental health topics. So there will be some political talk in this video just to provide some background on the topic at hand. However, overall, this will not be much of a political opinion piece except to point out the hypocrisy of some politicians and mental health advocates over this debacle. Let me open this discussion by saying, as someone who has suffered from lifelong mental health issues, as well as learning disabilities and developmental delays, I am not offended by Michael D. Adder's cartoon. It appears, however, that many politicians from different parties, as well as some mental health advocates, are clutching their pearls while collectively diving headfirst into the fainting couches. They are crying offense all over the news pages and the old Twitter machine. Some background on D. Adder's cartoon for those who don't follow Canadian politics or NHL hockey. A week ago, the Rolling Stones held a concert north of Barrie, Ontario, about 2 hours away from Toronto. And as the Minister of Sport and Tourism, Conservative Ontario MPP Lisa MacLeod was in attendance. So is the coach of the Ottawa Senators, an NHL team, Eugene Melnyk. Allegedly. Gotta use that word around here if we don't want to get into legal trouble. Ms. MacLeod went up to Melnyk and yelled at him, apparently unprovoked. "Do you know who I am?" she screamed. And she yells at him after he says he doesn't know. She yells, "I am your minister and you are a fracking piece of shite and you're an effing loser." MacLeod did offer some tepid apology on the Twitter machine for her actions, so it doesn't appear she is denying the incident entirely. Well, ain't that classy? Now, ordinarily, I wouldn't care about this kind of thing. Corporate-owned politician having a screaming match with a wealthy NHL hockey coach. Except for D. Adder's cartoon that was published in the Toronto Star earlier the past week in response to this incident, which in turn got many politicians and some mental health advocates up in arms. Apparently, Lisa MacLeod is on record for having mental health issues of her own, and this is likely why many would have choked on their pearls over Mr. D. Adder's cartoon. At least largely in part anyway. I might add that MacLeod's alleged mental health issues are where the hypocrisy all kicks in. From her government screwing with the already underfunded and strapped programs for autistic children, under her watch, I might add, when she was the Minister of Social Services, Children and Communities, to the cuts in mental health care spending. First off, we start off with mental health advocate and CEO of the Canadian Mental Health Association's Ontario Division, Camille Caneville, in a letter to the Toronto Star. The cartoon depicting the Honourable Lisa MacLeod in a straitjacket is heartbreaking and demoralizing for all those suffering and the people supporting them. I cannot imagine the Star printing a cartoon maligning a cancer patient. Well, let's stop right there for a second. For openers, Michael Deatter did issue an apology after the cartoon. He had stated that he did not know that Lisa MacLeod did have mental health issues. Therefore, I don't believe it was his intent to malign the mentally ill or to malign Lisa MacLeod for her mental health issues. It's a question of she behaved in an outrageous manner at the Rolling Stones concert, as reported, and he is responding to that with an editorial cartoon. But I will get to more about being accountable for outrageous behavior later in this video. Okay, let's move right along. Oh, Ontario Health Minister Christine Elliott. Come on down. You are the next contestant in The Price is Wrong. This from Christine Elliott. I couldn't agree with Kemi Q more. At a time when we've made so much progress in destigmatizing mental health challenges, the Toronto Star's cartoon is harmful and runs contrary to our goal of supporting Ontarians in their journey to mental wellness. Well, that's hypocrisy in a tweet. Hypocrisy of the worst kind. Because you see, kids, and most who live in Ontario can probably attest to this, Christine Elliott and her boss man, Doug Ford, the Premier, are doing anything but supporting Ontario in their journey to mental wellness. And they themselves do contribute to the stigmatization of mental illness. Now let's talk about mental health cuts in Ontario, and this happened under Christine Elliott's watch as the Ministry of Healthcare. Let's start off. Specifically, canceling the $2.1 billion earmarked for mental health care services over a 4-year period by the previous Ontario Liberal government. And they replaced that with only $1.9 billion over a 10-year period. Mathematically, this translates to approximately $330 to $335 million a year in budget cuts to mental health care services alone. Where was Camille Caneville and her colleagues who are offended by Michael Deatter's cartoon on this one? Where were they to critique the cuts? Oh, it doesn't end there. No. To add insult to injury, following the Danforth shooting this time last year, the Ford government decided to divert much of that already paltry $1.9 billion to the police services under the guise of training them to better handle suspects with mental health issues. While I agree that the police all over Canada are pretty much ill-trained to deal with people with mental illness, we have seen this time and time again across Canada. Something definitely needs to be done about that. However, the money that Fordzilla is diverting to the police is being taken away from patients who need the services, And here's something wild and crazy enough to think about that just might work. Perhaps many who do have run-ins with the police may not have had if they had access to appropriate services. After all, prevention, right? Overall, this move is a slap in the face to those suffering from mental illnesses and their caregivers, whoever they may be. In fact, this knee-jerk reaction to the Danforth shooting from this government implies that most of the mentally ill people are dangerous and are going to have a run-in with the law at some point, which couldn't be further from the truth. Basically, this is a form of criminalizing mental health. Now, if that doesn't further perpetuate the stigma of mental health, what say you, Ms. Kenville and her colleagues? Specifically, long-term psychotherapy, a necessity, and for many, the only effective treatment, is being cut. In fact, the role of psychiatrists, as I understand it, will be severely limited. They will no longer provide psychotherapy. Essentially, their role becomes that of a consultant instead of that of treating physician. Under the changes, psychiatrists would be limited to perhaps a one-time session with a patient to provide diagnosis and treatment recommendations and basically say bye-bye and good luck to you. This in the name of saving approximately $13.2 million. These cuts, despite the fact that Canadians, according to StatsCan, say that the biggest need is not being met, is psychotherapy. Given that piece of information, I think it would be safe to say that Canadians would think that more funding to improve access to psychotherapy would trump taking money out of the mental health care budget to fund the police. Again, under the guise of better training to deal with those who are mentally ill. Ms. Christine Elliott, Health Minister under Druggy Fordzilla, as part of your ministry, you're signing off on these cuts. If you are really in disagreement with these cuts, your boss man insists you make, you would have resigned. You would have said no. At least from your ministry anyway. Full stop. Christine Elliott, who took no time to cry at being offended by Michael Dieter's cartoon on the Twitter machine, is one such example of hypocrisy. Bringing up the mental health card only when it suits hers and her boss's narrative. Boys and girls, again, be more offended by these cuts to mental health care than an editorial cartoon in the Toronto Star or any newspaper for that matter. Now on to Lisa MacLeod. Once upon a time, she was the Minister of Children, Community and Social Services, long since demoted to the Ministry of Sport, Tourism and Culture. Funny for a woman who has no culture at all, but anyhow. When she held her previous portfolio of Children, Community and Social Services, she owns the cuts to services for autistic children. Yes, further cuts in an already strained system. This is a file where the Ontario Cons had really been trying to put lipstick on a pig to try to swing this in a positive light. There is no positive way to spin this. Some background. The government proposed offering a one-time lump sum capped at $140,000 to families instead of funding the regional service providers to continue to provide support and help maybe even increase the budget so they can provide even more support to more children. Worse, the scale to which they calculate this one-time lump sum goes according to the age of the child, not their needs. In other words, a family with a 12-year-old with autism would receive less than the family of a 5-year-old with a similar diagnosis. I don't have to really tell you how ridiculous this is. I think most of us understand quite well that a 12-year-old could well have lower cognitive functioning than that of a 5-year-old with a similar autism diagnosis. Either way, since treatment for a child with autism generally starts at about $50,000 per year, that's it, 50, and can run upward to about $70,000 according to the Ontario Autism Coalition, and it can easily go to $80,000 per year for more intensive treatments. So the lump sum being offered to these families is basically a slap in the face. About a month after this boneheaded exercise in math was proposed, the Fordzilla government walked things back just a tad after much pressure and backlash from outraged parents of children with autism who would be affected. And these families who would likely go broke under Ford's changes. Basically saying it would study the file and said it could offer up $600 million for families. Whatever the case, the Ford government is still hell-bent on making these cuts. Oh, and kids, in case we need a reminder, we have seen Dougie Ford's true colors regarding kids with autism and other special needs. Who can forget in 2014 when he was a Toronto City Councillor kvetching about a group home for kids with autism and special needs in his suburban neighborhood, going all NIMBY. Ford claimed the centre was ruining the community by bringing youth with violent behavior into a middle-class neighborhood, arguing it needed to be shut down and relocated. Ford later told the father of a child with autism to go to hell, and complained that somehow he was the victim of a full-out jihad. On another occasion, Ford vowed to buy the house himself and resell it. Yes, Fordzilla also played the victim card here. What else is new? Now that is offensive. Once again, far more offensive than Mr. Deatter's cartoon. Overall, we cannot pull out Lisa MacLeod or anyone else's mental health card when we try to hold them accountable for any wrongdoings. We cannot dive headfirst into the fainting couch, clutching our pearls for dear life over an editorial cartoon, while at the very same time politicians like Dougie Ford display disdain for children with autism and other special needs, or shows indifference toward mental health care, and health care for that matter, as his cuts to programs and potentially criminalizing mental illness further, not only further perpetuate the stigma of mental illness, but also remove what little resources there were in the first place. The Ford government's measures cause way more harm to those with mental illness, autism, or other disabilities, thus further perpetuating the stigma. Just because Lisa MacLeod may have some form of mental illness, this does not exclude her from being held accountable. She chose to run for office. She chose to align herself with a party that blatantly doesn't give a crap about mental health or other disabilities or chronic illnesses. She chose to accept to be the Minister of Children, Communities, and Social Services, which meant she signed off on the cuts to programs for autistic children, as well as would have signed off on cuts to mental health care, as has Health Minister Christine Elliott. It also means she should be called out whenever she behaves outrageously, unbecoming of a government official and public figure. This includes yelling and cussing at people at a concert or any other public venue, even if he was the coach of a hockey team that performed poorly. And when she does, then expect the editorials or commentary condemning the behavior, or editorial commentary offering critique to respond in kind. Overall, you cannot selectively pull the mental card when it suits you. If anything, that is an insult to those who truly are struggling with mental health issues every day of their lives, like myself. Thus, again, further perpetuating the stigma of mental health. That is far worse and far more offensive than Michael D'Adder's cartoon. As to Miss Kemi Kenville, who asks if the Toronto Star would publish a cartoon maligning people with cancer. Well, if there was a conservative MPP who was a cancer survivor, yet is part of this government that would sign off on cuts to cancer services, yeah, we can malign that person. Absolutely. We're not going to malign them because they have cancer, but we're going to malign them for their own hypocrisy and their actions. It's the same thing with Lisa MacLeod that I just illustrated in this video. So, Ms. Kenville and those like her, please channel your outrage to the Ford government for their actions, inactions, and budget cuts that will cause far more harm and damage for the foreseeable future, instead of wasting time on an editorial cartoon that many will forget in short order. That's just about going to do it here. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, and if you don't, give it a thumbs down. Please consider subscribing if you haven't already, and hit that little ringy dingy icon below so you can be notified every time I upload. Please take care of yourselves and each other. Always remember, if there is someone vulnerable or at risk in your midst, please take the time to check in on them and spend a little time. Sometimes sharing coffee or a meal or just lending a sympathetic ear can make all the difference in that person's life. Catch you all in the next video. Straight Talking Florida Chick over and out.